Today we're talking about inflation, friend or foe, and entrepreneurs go through phases. We all do. It's like a roller coaster. And we have to worry about n- selling new products or services. We have to worry about making payroll. We have to worry about paying our property taxes. We have a lot of challenges. But if you add to those challenges these external threats, these external issues that can occur, it becomes even more challenging. And I think there isn't any one individual or any one startup that hasn't been affected by inflation. So we thought this would be a really interesting topic to take on today to really understand how is inflation impacting startups. There are also challenging stories, and we want to hear from you. So we're going to do open mic today, and I know, Michele, you've got some personal stories you want to share as well.
Absolutely. And really, this is one of my favorite subjects. It's so deep. It's confusing. Let's all admit that, especially if you're listening to Bloomberg and hearing about inverted curves and it's, oh my God, what do I do? Like you just want to pull your hair out, just trying to figure out what to do. But for us, first, I want to just give a little bit of a story of what we've faced. Of course, we've all been hearing on the news, oh my gosh, supply chain. Most of the country probably didn't even know or think about, let's just say, think about supply chain. For one of the companies that I'm involved in, Meowingtons, we're a retail company. And my gosh, did it hit us hard. And of course, it started all with COVID, as we all are familiar with. And the way that inflation was influencing us was we basically stopped ordering from China. Why? Because the demand and the availability of, gosh, who would have thought of it, shipping containers and ships became horribly expensive. Literally, and this is absolutely true, it's not fake news stuff. We went from doing 40 HQ, a 40 high container, that were around $4,000 before COVID. Wow, we thought that was so much, right? To bring our merchandise over from China to the US, East Coast. Went from $4,000 to $24,000. Like it's almost unimaginable that could happen. And don't forget, it was also, not to be political, that was also on the very negative effects of some of the very high tariff rates, the increases. We were familiar with, there were certain products that were in categories where there were up to 25% tariffs. That was under the previous administration. Nonetheless, it hit and it hit hard, and we stopped. We had to literally cease doing any ordering of merchandise that was shipped from China. It's been a very tough, I'll say, well over a year for that. However, the good news is now is we are starting to see a decrease there. But that is a classic example of one of the components that inflation affects that can kill you, which is pricing, meaning pricing to get your merchandise, whether it be raw material or what we call a landed cost, or just even services or employees. That's how inflation has personally affected one of the companies that I've been involved. So for us, we're talking here today, we're saying, oh my gosh, is it a friend or a foe? Of course, I find it a foe, but I also am a person that likes to look at the silver lining. The silver lining would be, it forces you to be efficient. It has forced us to look at alternative manufacturing, at alternative revenue stream. And it also has caused us to take a real microscope to our costs. And, you know, I know most people believe, oh my gosh, when a company starts cutting costs, it's just bad, that it's all negative. I can tell you that's not necessarily true. If you can cut costs to be more productive, let's just say there's fat or there's other efficiencies you can gain otherwise, then in the long run, that is good. But I want to hear what Kerrigan says. And then after that, I'm going to just read some research that we found
Before
about.
you do that, I don't want to let your story go by so quickly. Why couldn't you just pass the costs on to customers? I'm curious,
Yeah.
like, why can't you just, so if your costs go up by 20%, or actually, I guess in your case, it went up by 500% for shipping from China, why can't you just increase those costs to the consumer? I know that's how inflation happens, I understand. But why did you make the decision to not ship those goods instead of make the decision to just raise prices on those goods? Because everyone in the United States they're all getting the same hit with the same price increases on their cost base. And what went through your mind around that?
Yeah, for us, we know our customers. We're in cat furniture and stuff for cat people, like cat trees, cat beds, Meowingtons. What we know is that they are price sensitive, and it is, let's be honest, it is a discretionary purchase. So we know because we have over the years done a lot of price testing. We knew that our customer base would not weather even like 100% markup, I mean, over the current retail prices. So for us, we might as well just shut the doors, literally, if we were going to raise our prices to cover all the expenses. And don't forget, there are still competitors out there, probably with excess inventory. Perhaps they have more localized manufacturing. You still have to be competitive, Colin. So it is a bit of a conundrum. For us, we did start to look for other non oversee sources. I would say that was mildly successful, but still presented a challenge. So for us right now, we're just looking forward to going back to our manufacturers and the impacts of more normalized. I don't say it's
Right.
all the way
So
done.
so
Yeah.
it's interesting you say it's discretionary, and so that the more discretionary your goods are, the less ability you have to raise prices. But if they're essential, like an automobile, we have to drive. If they're essentials, then they can increase prices on those, and consumers will continue to purchase those products at higher prices because you have to get to work or you have to get to the store. You have to eat. You're going to buy chicken no matter what. You're going to buy eggs. You're going to buy all of that, those goods, because they're essentials. Is that sort of what you're in your particular case? The products are more discretionary. They're more fun-based product. You could argue the cats need these toys too.
Oh, yes. And we do argue that, but it doesn't make it true. Yeah, that's what we've experienced. And like I said, the friend part of it, it will force people out of business. Okay. I'm just, maybe this sounds draconian, competitors perhaps, but it really is causing, and at least in our situation, and I'm sure many other people, to focus and to really examine what our cost structure is and how to become more efficient. And yes, we are raising prices a little. For us, we had a pricing marketing strategy that was very centric around a lot of aggressive promotional sales. So what we're doing on those is we have less than that activities. We still, whatever, instead of 40% off, it might be 20% off. And instead of like just selling out and selling down on everything, we're keeping a very close eye on inventories. And when it starts to get low, we're not like aggressively discounting them because we need that inventory. So that's the bright side. It's, I'm not going to, not to misrepresent, it has been extremely painful. And I do expect it's going to be painful, Colin, for probably another year.
Yeah, it's just interesting how different businesses benefit and other businesses are harmed by the inflation rate. And shipping containers going from $3,000 or $4,000 to $24,000 from China. I mean, that's unbelievable and just unbelievable. You think about some other businesses, like we also have a vacation rental business, and it seems to be benefiting from inflation in the sense that the housing prices go up and our investors are benefiting from the fact that as the prices go up, as the inflation goes up, it also the price of real estate goes up, and yet our borrowing costs have been fixed. I know we had a 30-year mortgage at 3%, and nowadays, now again, that they're trying to fix that. I know today, I think it hit almost 5%, the borrowing costs, which again is another negative impact of inflation, is that it increases borrowing costs for new businesses or new startups, unless but the ones who benefit are the ones who had the loans put in place prior to the big surge in interest rates as well. But yeah, it's interesting how many different companies are affected. And I know in the audience, you probably have a company affected. Roland, Warren, we'd love to hear from you, Roland, again. You've probably been impacted by inflation, and you want to share with us. We're doing open mic today, just a roundtable conversation about how inflation is impacting startups.
Just another anecdote I had. Sorry, I'm a little out of breath. I was doing some exercise, but my mother, she's a restaurant owner, and she when the pandemic hit, she basically wanted to pivot her business to more like a food truck. So she actually purchased one from China, and the food truck itself was probably about $12,000. It was a trailer, and all in for shipping they quoted her 15,000, but once they finished the actual price just jumped up to around $22,000. It basically killed that business model, and she had to pivot again to try to figure out some other way to take advantage. But yeah, I've seen it happen just personally.
Yeah, that's painful. And you think about small business owners, right? It's oftentimes their whole livelihood as well as their whole life savings. So we feel for you and your family, Carrico.
Yeah, it's interesting that she couldn't have that made in the United States. Like, why is it that our country, and in your case too, Michele, why is it that, let's try our country, this is a global app. Why is it that the United States is so dependent upon China for the manufacturing of these goods? In your case, it was a truck. So is the idea they would put a truck on a container, this big food truck, and ship it across? Is that was what they were doing there in China? They're
Exactly,
building it?
exactly. And I think probably the cost was most likely the reason why. But even with that, when she actually just started talking to me about it, I started telling her that there were other options. She could purchase other vehicles and retrofit those to add kitchens and stuff if she really wanted to go to that mobile kitchen type business model. But yeah, I think relying on China was the major issue. She had to take out another loan. It was just more and more costs building up.
Yeah, it's unbelievable how many businesses and startups are impacted by inflation. As consumers, we hear about it all the time. It really does hurt consumers, especially those on fixed income. It hurts young people who are trying to get ahead in the world. They want to buy their first home, or they even renting now. The costs of renting, and we live in South Florida, and the costs of renting have gone up 38% over the last couple of years. It's insane. I don't know. Young people today, they're faced with these additional challenges. And as a startup, thinking about this, and do we try to inflation protect our businesses? Do we try to come up with ways that we can protect ourselves, maybe by, I don't know, maybe you pre-buy the containers, Michele. Maybe you're buying them a year in advance so that you don't get
Yeah,
caught
I mean,
on these type of things. What can we do? Like, I know we can't just sit here and complain. We're here to talk about solutions. What can Carraga's mother do? What do we do?
yeah, for us, we can, at least what I found, there's no such thing as pre buying. It's like Uber, right? It's flex pricing. But certainly for us, what it forced us to do is, look at, is there sources in the Americas, Canada, US, South America, and we're starting to uncover some of those. For me, that's a great thing. It's never a good thing to be dependent on any one supplier or distribution chain anyway. So that's why I'm cautiously optimistic that it's going to drive some long-term efficiencies. So, Kirikou, was your mom able to look into other options, like you
So,
said?
yeah, so we did investigate other options, retrofitting, other purchasing. I actually purchased a food truck and just sought to retrofit it ourselves, but she just took the option to take more money, do more financing, and pay the extra money. But it still took some time for her to get her shipment. So even with that, it was another 6 months, and this was last year going into end of last year into this year that it even worked out for her. So
Yeah, it's interesting that you talk about time to market. So this shortage of goods, we experienced that in the real estate business as well, where it would take 4 to 5 months to get windows and doors for some of the projects we're working on. And I know Michelle and I are also involved in a vacation rental business as well. And we're trying to buy pools. I know it sounds like pools. How hard can that be? I mean, why is it? And we're talking about over a year delay right now for pools. And so it's these delays that can also impact your business as well. If you run a little vacation rental business or you're running another type of business and it takes so long for us to get those materials to work with so that we can build. Any other thoughts on that, Michelle? I mean, that whole time. So it's, I don't know what you call that. Timeflation?
I don't know, but it's certainly not just in time. Look, if we had a crystal ball, we could all have looked in the future and stocked up, which, by the way, there are companies that somehow did that, especially for processing chips, and they reap the rewards of it. But most of us don't get to do that. So I would just say we really just have to stay on top of what's going on in the world. And when we kicked this off, I mentioned there were some studies that we were reading. One of them was in the Harvard Business Review. This was an article that was published in September of 2021, and it was basically strategies to help your company weather inflation. And I thought this was really interesting was they were saying that companies that weathered previous inflationary periods, of course they paid attention to the cost of their goods and adjusted pricing and all the things that are very in front of us that we can do. But what their research found that the best performers also took significant steps to boost productivity, primarily by cutting costs. We've been enjoying very lucrative times, hiring and in some cases inflated wages, but it's a chance for companies to reset as well. Look around. Is there waste in your company on spending? But more importantly, also, is there an opportunity to improve productivity? So maybe you just threw a couple of people at a specific task that you actually should have automated. Like that's only going to help you in the end by establishing those kind of processes and efficiency, really getting transparent about where your resources are going. And I'm not just talking about raw resources, but the most important, your human capital, like how are people spending time, and try to drive those efficiencies, ergo cutting costs. It's only going to help us in the end. Roland, would love to hear your thoughts on this subject. And then let's go to 420 after. Roland.
Thanks, Colin, for inviting me on stage. So
We,
I
we always
guess,
love listening to you. You have such good wisdom.
oh, thank you. So the way I would try and look at this challenge is, I think it's twofold. And one is if you're a existing business, and two, if you're considering starting up a business or have just started up a business. Let's go with the former. You already have an existing business that's running. What I would do if I were in your shoes is I would grab my P&L and look at all the cost lines and say, do I need to change my mindset in the way we do things? Because I bet that due to inflation, every one of those cost lines is going to increase, whether it's rental, whether it's electricity, energy, whether it may even be staffing costs. So then the question becomes, if you want to not end up reducing staff because all the staff are needed on deck, then the question becomes, how can you organize things in a different way to ensure that you maximize productivity while managing your cost efficiently? And that may even include changing your mindset with regards to having an office and moving to remote working. As a routine rather than a one-off.
So it's interesting is to do more with less. And you bring up the whole issue of staffing that I know in the last report I heard there was a 5.1% increase in wage costs in the United States. And in some industries, there really just, it seems like there's almost a shortage of staff and people are just bidding people up. But your solution is interesting. Become more productive, do more with less. Do we really need the office?
There are things I think we need to question as to what we really need and what we're trying to achieve and how we're trying to achieve that. And is the how creating more cost or less cost? It's about making smarter choices and smarter decisions, be it in the go to market, the marketing, the customer engagement, the customer fulfillment. There was something else you brought up in your context, which was ability to get raw materials and source raw materials. I guess the knock on challenge that we currently face is not just inflation, it's a supply chain issue. So I don't know whether to call that supplyflation or whatever, but it's real. And I guess there, depending on the age of the business and the data available, moving towards a much more predictive system where you can potentially mitigate future costs by coming to better agreements with suppliers and such. The other thing is if the business already has certain capital costs, whether from loans or liquidity, managing liquidity and cash flow, is looking at what the agreements are around those loans because you don't want them to be shooting up. Now, if you're a business, the second scenario, if you're a business that is recently started up, or is you're a founder that's considering launching a startup, I think the important questions I would ask there are number one, funding, cost of capital, and how that funding is, coming into play. The second question is what is the type of product or service that you intend or plan to offer? And if you look at that product or service from a customer perspective, would the customer consider that product or service discretionary spend or necessity spend? Say, for example, you have your product is oriented to pet owners. If the pet owners love their pets and they're not going to abandon their pets, then obviously they will have to carry on feeding their pets or whatever they buy for their pets. So again, that is a question that needs to be addressed. You need to look at it from a customer perspective, and let's not forget that the customer is an important stakeholder of any business. And understanding how inflation is broadly affecting your customer base, whether it's B2C or B2B, is critical to the longer term success of the business.
So let me ask you a question, Roland. Do you think that the rise in interest rates will increase the cost for startups to get financing or funding? Will VCs now start asking for a guaranteed return on investment like they did in the old days? Are we starting to look at a different environment for raising money? It's for startups. Any thoughts on that?
So I was looking at a report that I received. Hold on, today's the 8th. So I received the report 2 days ago, and it was saying that startup investment in the US for the first quarter this year has declined 15% when compared to last year. What does that tell me? There are two ways I could interpret that. One way is by saying, look, in the last year, there were a lot of exits, and therefore investors invested that last year, and therefore there is a decline in investment this year. That's one perspective on that piece of data. A second perspective on that piece of data would be, look, in the last 2 years we've been in a pandemic, working remotely. My perception in the last 2 years was that investors were investing much more based on gut feeling and reaction in terms of what was needed and what could deliver value. As people start getting back to offices, investors included, I have the feeling that gut investing is going to be on the decline, and we're going to get much more scientific, rigorous analysis before investing. So this due diligence is going to get a lot more rigorous, and they won't invest in anything and everything. Now, the third perspective is that possibly startup investment in the US is on the decline, just as if you align that with number of businesses leaving Silicon Valley, etc., then potentially there might be that decline. The question then becomes, where is that investment going from a geographic perspective?
Yeah, they're all coming to South Florida. It's getting busy down here, and our prices of everything are going up.
Right.
Rents,
So,
houses,
so
everything.
if that's going up, then it's not just an inflationary factor; it is a supply-demand factor, which is too much money chasing too few goods.
It's always supply and demand, isn't it? You're going back to economics class here in college, right?
That's what I studied as well, so I
Yeah.
cannot avoid giving that 2 cents.
All right. King, you're on the stage. Do you have a story to share or some thoughts around how inflation affects startups? You could, yeah, there you go.
Sure. Thanks for the question. Yeah, my family has a small kind of asset management business, and part of that is dealing with industrial and commercial property. And so, from that perspective, the impact of inflation certainly has seen an increase in valuations and the income that streams that come in from that. Now, the flip side of that is that there's also increased cost, right? Because there's maintenance cost and those charges have increased. Yes, borrowing costs can be fixed depending on the negotiated terms of the financing, but there's still costs that aren't financed, right, with traditional mortgage or other type of funding for, depending on the property you have, a property type, when it comes to those maintenance costs. And then there's also been the challenge of wage inflation. And oftentimes it's not a positive thing to say, and people don't like to talk about it because it may not be the more politically correct thing to talk about. But the fact is, from a business perspective, it is a real deal of the challenges of wage inflation, particularly if you're in a more, lower margin business. And so that has caused, particularly on the retail side, and also we have a little bit of a retail function as well, the fact that you've had to, frankly, this is going to sound bad, but it's not bad. It's good for business. You've had to cut hours, right? For, yes, quote unquote, you can advertise we're paying this minimum wage or this average wage, but that may also cause it to be where hours are reduced in order to deal with rising wage inflation while also dealing with other challenges when you're dealing with that component from a small business perspective. And I'm sure from a much larger, but obviously we're talking more startup and smaller businesses, which is the majority of companies in America. On the retail side, too, obviously, there's the issue of sourcing, right? Product sourcing, and it forces diversification, as I think Michelle mentioned earlier, because a lot of folks, there's this push to Asia and China. And you asked, I think earlier, Colin, why are businesses so dependent on China? And I think it's because of it's not really even the cost anymore. I think that's a lazy way to analyze it, in my opinion. I think it's more because of their manufacturing efficiencies. It's not because they're the cheapest. China actually now isn't necessarily the cheapest nation to source product from now, but most, particularly if you're maybe just starting up, you've been told China, and if you turn on the TV, China, when places like the Philippines or Vietnam or other places may actually be more cost effective. And I think it's forcing businesses now to look to diversify those supply chain issues beyond, frankly, just Asia, but looking at, I took a trip to South America, and their pricing was terrific on certain products, particularly jewelry and things of that nature. And frankly, the cost of transportation, shipping and things of that nature are a lot less cumbersome versus trying to arrange things from other places. Now, to your point as well about what are solutions, right? Because I've spoken of the challenges of wage inflation and dealing with diversifying the supply chain. And this matters to all businesses, but particularly small businesses. From my perspective as well, my professional career, I've created some television shows, particularly around business. And what I have had the beautiful opportunity to do is to talk to hundreds of business owners and of all types, but certainly of small business owners. And what I have found from a lot of them is that they feel they're alone. They don't know what to do. They've got a great idea. They've got this amazing concept and they're ready to go take over the world. And then they hit their first roadblock and it's, oh my God, what do I do? And I think what I have seen is they don't really have a support mechanism in place. Sure, they may have their family and folks who say, yeah, you can do it and I support you. But beyond that, the help with technical assistance when you deal with, for instance, trade issues, because a lot of this is trade. And so one of the solutions I would offer is for folks to plug in with the proper support mechanisms for small businesses that can help them. Free resources, the SBA. You'd be shocked what you can get free online. And small businesses, this apply to someone that has 500 employees or 5 employees or none, but you'd be shocked what you can learn from there. But an alternative as well that I really encourage folks to consider are particularly when it comes to really all kinds of issues, but just tying it back to what I just mentioned here about dealing with the challenge of the supply chain and sourcing for folks who may be, for instance, in the retail side or even manufacturing, because you still have to supply that your core product. You need the core material to manufacture that end product, whatever that might be. For instance, you may need metals from certain countries, or you may need different type of minerals for other type of products. If you're in the tech space, like semiconductors, et cetera, is look at places like your local chamber of commerce. You would be shocked how much resources that local chamber of commerce can help you, because I've had relations with with the chambers. Even if your local chamber of commerce, maybe you're in a remote area in your state, and right now I'm speaking of just from the US. For those who may be in other parts of the world right now, I'm speaking of the US, but a lot of other places have these as well. If you're in a more remote place, you'd be surprised. A lot of times your local chamber is a part of your state chamber. And that state chamber has a lot more resources, particularly when it comes to trade and putting you in contact with the Council General for Brazil or the Council General for Italy. For instance, if you're in the clothing business and want to get your hands on the best type of material, if you're a person who designs or makes clothing, right? If you have a clothing line or what have you, or the apparel business. So I would encourage folks today, and I'll land there because I don't want to, over talk it. But there's a lot more that can be shared. But just those, two options, you'd be surprised could assist with. And by the way, back to the SBA point, when it comes to looking for financing, that can handle some of the challenges with the rising inflation rates that the Fed has already mentioned that they're going to do. And from an industrial and commercial real estate side of things, you're always looking at those interest rates. The SBA has a variety of loans. If you've been around, say maybe about 2, 3, 4, 5 years or what have you, and can show certain things that are very attractive on the financing side that assists with capping your borrowing cost while being able to help finance these supply chain matters, that you can get connected with your chambers that can put you in contact with sourcing options beyond quote unquote China only. And you can look at places like, I don't know, for instance, I'll talk to folks. I don't know anybody in Vietnam. Exactly. That's why you're that business support group that I'm mentioning to you. They already have those relationships, because a lot of times if they have a partnership with their state chamber, the state chambers are working with their state governors, and those governors and all are doing trade missions all over the country, or partner all over the world. So yeah, that's my take.
That's so wow. Now I know why they call you King Biz, and I'm definitely following you, by the way, because that was just phenomenal, and the lessons you shared with us here. I do know that because we were involved in a couple of pet-related companies, and we order a lot textiles from, and reality is we buy them from China, and 90% of all textiles in the United States come in from China. So those there just isn't a lot of opportunities for us to buy these products made in the United States. Now, I know, Michele, you did something very unique because I've actually been in the car with her where she buys these big rolls of cloth and she drops them off in Miami so people in Miami could make these beds. And I thought it was funny. But you're right about the whole manufacturing process being owned by China, and they own the cloth market too. So it's very hard to go around them sometimes. And then all your other stuff, like the other one I would add for free service, and we did a couple shows on this, and you can listen to them on startup.club. If you go to the website, we do all the recordings there. And this show is we just put into a podcast. So you can catch it on your favorite podcast network as well. It's called the Serial Entrepreneur Club, and you just search on any podcast network and that will come up. And we've done a show on incubators, accelerators, and innovation centers, a really good show. Most of them offer free services, free programs. You can find ways to raise money, and it does take a village to raise a startup. And I truly believe that, and your advice was very wise. Michele, do you want to tell us the story about your Miami drops? You actually call them Miami drops.
Yeah, I do. And necessity is the mother of invention. We all know this, but gosh, I just couldn't get anything out of China. Like I said, I refused to pay the prices. So, yeah, I just started really like talking to people, finding out like how could I get specifically some cat beds produced here in the US. So it set me on a journey, and I've met a group of amazing people that are specifically some ladies here in our area where this is what they do for a living, and they completely and totally embrace the opportunity. So for me, it was a real win, and I think it was for them too. It's also encouraged me and given me hope to try to expand beyond that and try to find other goods, like I was saying, that can actually be produced in the Americas. Not only does it help me in terms of the shipping costs, it's actually much greater than that. It gives me a lot of flexibility in terms of working through designs since I'm not sitting there at the factory in China and it's a challenge at times. It also gives me flexibility in terms of inventory. I don't have to carry these massive inventories and I'm not paying tariffs. And then the real big upside is, like I said, there's a whole economy of people that are looking for this type of work that you can feel like you're contributing to. So it's been a positive experience, and I'm hoping that I can expand on it further.
Yeah, it's great. King, if you have any more thoughts, stay on stage. We'd love to hear from you, any more thoughts you have. But we'll jump down to, how do you pronounce your name? Hanai? Hanai?
Hi, actually, it's Hanye.
Hanye.
Yeah,
Hanye. And I see you're a master's of economics. So we have the right person in the room here to help us explain what is inflation.
I really appreciate you. Actually, I just wanted to share something with you, and I know actually for answering your question about what inflation is in economics, there is a kind of general description of that we all have read it in the books, in the textbook, and actually main literature of the economics. We call it the general increase in the prices, in most of the prices. And there are some statistical techniques for measuring it in different indexes for showing this, and I'm just not gonna through these things exactly, but if you want, one of the things I wanted to share with you guys was that I'm coming from Iran, a country with high rate of inflations, with chronic inflation for many years. And in different actually years, we had, or now still we are actually passing the time with high inflation shocks. And because I worked in financial sector for more than 1 year and I had studied economics, I have seen somehow the effects of the inflation in different sectors. One of the things I have seen here was that most of the companies here in Iran, I'm not sure how it would be in the United States or in the North American or European, or if I want to be more precise, in developed markets. I'm not sure this will actually be correct or not, but what is going on here is that many businesses are taking profit or actually having lucrative opportunities during the higher inflation rates. When you look at the actually financial statement, you see there is a jump in actually the profits and EPS and also the margins actually in the companies or businesses which we are in most contact with the inflation. It is one of the things that I have seen in many years, and actually because we have passed just the high actually rate of inflation in these 2 years, in these two recent years, many factories, many producers were really actually take profit from this situation. And also here in Iran, one of the problems is that we also have some regulation to control the market, and the pricing of the products is not completely upon to the actually supply and demand rule in Iran, because the government will change it for controlling the inflation rates, because it's really so high, and the government is really don't want to have some protests and don't want to people having the streets. It's going to just intervene the situation. But I guess if there was no intervention, maybe it would be better. And because I guess the level of the government intervention is less in actually more developed markets, so maybe the profits will be more there. Another thing I have seen was that the service sector actually has been increased during these years of the high inflation rates, and it was one of the sectors that has been really growing in Iran. I guess the reason is that because the service sector has actually less cost, as Roland just indicate about the cost of the products or something like this, and it is really important to be optimum in the actual methods and everything in during the high inflation periods. But the service sector, especially the ones who are actually involved with less things in comparison with the product is actually sector, for instance, in their actually cost of the good sold, the services are less in comparison with that part. This sector has been really growing in Iran, and I guess the reason is the profitability of this sector, because they were actually higher profits in service sector during the high inflation rates, and there are lots of medians actually in the markets as a result of the inflation. And me, if I wanted to have some idea for during an inflationary period in some part of the world, I will think about the service sectors with actual less costs and not involving lots of costs, because it's really important. But because the services will have increase in their rates upon to the inflation, because they are paying the wages and everything is going to grow, as I just told at the actual first of my speaking about the definition of the inflation. Everything will have an increase in the price, so the services will also increase, and the wages are a good reason for that. But the costs maybe have less increase in comparison with production sector, and it can be a good idea to go. And if a person is gonna thinking about starting a business and he or she is just thinking about which sector will be a good choice during the inflation, I guess the service sector is one of the things that's really worth to thinking about.
Wow. It's really fascinating to hear outside of the US, the impacts are the same. So thank you for sharing that, Hane. Um, we are coming towards the end of our show. So I want to just remind everyone that we do have an email list for Startup Club. So we encourage you to join the email list so that you can stay informed of any special events or guest speakers that we've had. We've had some amazing speakers already this year, from Jeffrey Moore, who wrote Crossing the Chasm, which is considered one of the top 5 business books ever written. We've also had Procter and Gamble on doing their competition for living healthy types of solutions. We've also had the privilege of having recently, from one of our other leaders on Startup Club, brought on the founder of Reebok. So if you want to keep informed about these really cool events, please just go to www.startup.club and join our email list. So without further ado, I see George, Mr. 420, is on the stage. I know you're actually been doing a startup that's taken a lot of capital, a lot of time. It's very legally intensive. It, George, is inflation influencing you in a bad or a good way? And what are you doing about it? We'd love to hear.
George, if you had to buy all that testing equipment now, are the costs much higher than, because you got them a couple years ago, I believe, right? Yeah, and the price of weed, does it actually just rise with inflation, or is it actually dropping in price? I'm just curious if you.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead, Roland. You're the last up. You're last up. We'll close it at the hour, on the hour.
So I just had a question for George. Are you seeing rise in demand for cannabis?
Because everybody has to deal with the inflation, the stress of inflation. That's how they deal with it. Just teasing.
Exactly what I was thinking.
All right, that's great. That's a great way to end the show. Next week, we are going to the Metaverse. Okay, so we have one of the leaders, leading technology companies. We have the president. She came on and she spoke here about incubators, accelerators. Actually, she was on that show because they offered an incubator inside the metaverse, and the Canadian government had hired them to set this up. So we learned so much from that show that we decided to bring her back, and we're talking with her next week about how startups can benefit from the metaverse and what this are there opportunities in the metaverse where we can launch businesses. Is there? I know in her case they launched an incubator, which I find interesting. I find it fascinating. And you may not be in the business of the metaverse, but you may be in another business. Michele and I are good friends with the gentleman who's founded Fat Village, Fort Lauderdale Arts and Technology Village, and they're doing a $500 million construction project in that neighborhood, but they also are interested in doing a metaverse version of their neighborhood as well. So what kind of applications could startups use? That's all next week, 2 o'clock Eastern on the Serial Entrepreneur Club Hour. Thank you for listening, and Karaga, Roland, King, Hanai, George, always really appreciated it, and always love it when you come on and share your thoughts. Thanks again. We'll see you next week.
Be well.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Take care.
Thanks.